Hey, all, Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co. All right, y'all, Scott Horton Show. Check out the website at scotthorton.org. 4,000-something interviews in the archives there going back to 2003, and sign up for the podcast feed and all of that there, scotthorton.org. Follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Introducing our good friend Sheldon Richman, the most libertarian man in the world. He writes for antiwar.com and a lot of places, including his own blog, which is sheldonrichman.com, the free association blog. And he's got a great article that I'm really glad he wrote. It's called Brexit. Which kind of dependence now? What a curious title. Welcome back to the show. How's it going, Sheldon?
Doing fine, and always great to be with you.
Good deal. Very happy to have you here. Well, what kind of dependence now? Break it down.
Well, what I tried to show in that piece, and I think it's a point that's I haven't seen made, is that Brexit has been portrayed, at least at some level, as a contest between Britain being, part of Europe, interdependent by being in the EU, part of that whole organization, or being independent by breaking away. So that's the way it's often been portrayed. But I think if you go deeper, you find it's really kind of a choice of what kind of dependency or interdependency, which is really the better word, interdependency. Because if Britain leaves the EU, it will be legally and politically or institutionally independent, because it will no longer be subject to the European Parliament, the European Commission, all those bureaucracies that make up the EU. But at the same time, it will be still in the world economy and therefore dependent on both what its own policies are and what's going on in the rest of the world. So, I tend to be a decentralist because not only for strictly libertarian moral reasons, but just because the smaller the jurisdiction, the cheaper it is to vote with your feet. In other words, to move. So if the local government in a small jurisdiction becomes oppressive or too onerous compared to neighboring jurisdictions, the costs of picking up and moving are cheaper if the smaller the jurisdiction versus if the jurisdictions are very large. So if you look at the EU, that's a very large jurisdiction. That's all of Europe. And so moving is much more expensive than, say, moving from England to France or Switzerland or someplace else if you needed to escape the government. So an institutionally independent state like England now, or Britain, will still be dependent in the sense that capital and people can flee if things get too burdensome. And so I choose liberal dependency or liberal interdependency, liberal by liberal I mean classical liberal, original liberal, libertarian, versus institutional, versus the interdependence that's represented by the massive bureaucracy known as the European Union.
Yeah, well, and you say in here the EU is in essence a cartel intended to suppress competition among the states of Europe. And then you say, yeah, it's complicated. There's some liberalizing things there too. But explain what you really mean by that. Is that what it's for in the first place, is to make it too hard to vote for your feet, so you got to put up with what they want to saddle you with here?
Well, these things are always complicated. I think we need to start out with that. Anybody that presents these things as black and white is really not telling you the truth or has not fully understood it himself. In setting up a united Europe, which actually goes back to right after World War II, it's taken different forms. When I was growing up, it was the common market, and the goal there was a free trade zone. Well, partly the goal. There can always be a mix of intentions. There could be liberal intentions. And when I use the word liberal, I mean libertarian. I mean trade, free trade, small government, It doesn't interfere with people's peaceful activities. And that's how they use liberal in Europe too. It's only here that we kind of mean the opposite, in the sense of, Ted Kennedy liberal. So I have no trouble believing that a good part of the motive was liberalization, to have Europe be a free trade zone, not have barriers between the European states. There was an understanding, and there were liberals who were pushing for this. There were, don't forget that you have Ludwig Erhard in Germany, who at the end of the war, basically without the knowledge of the U.S. government, which of course is still administering West Germany at that time, deregulates the economy, strips away all the wage and price controls, to the horror of John Kenneth Galbraith and the American planners. He just said, "The hell with it." He did it like on a Sunday night, I think, when they were all drinking wine and partying or whatever they did. So you did have liberals, people who were pretty good guys who understood that small government is better than big government, and that free economic activity is good and tends to benefit everybody. And so that was definitely part of the motive. But here's the problem: even if that is your motive, if you assemble a large transnational bureaucracy, even to oversee a liberal program, you're setting in motion a perverse dynamic, because you're going to have a gathering of regulator types. Who's going to be attracted to those jobs? Bureaucrats, regulators, and they will attract rent seekers. In other words, people, mainly big influential companies, that are looking for benefits that cannot be attained in the free market, that can only be obtained through political intervention. So even if your motive is good in setting up the bureaucracy, in time, I think we need to bet that it's going to be turning out bad stuff. And that's what the EU has done. A lot of trivial and large regulations about how, in order for something to be classified a digital camera and not carry hundreds of dollars of tariffs, it can only record, it can record no more than 30 minutes at a time before stopping. If the camera records more than 30 minutes, it's called a video camera, not a digital camera, and it carries hundreds of dollars of tariffs. I mean, I posted the article on Facebook. That's the sort of thing that regulators will do under the influence of rent seekers if you put them all in one place and give them a lot of power over a large geographical area. That's what's happened.
Okay, so now, Sheldon, the Brits have voted to leave. I guess we'll see, what really even how that plays out. They have a couple of years to do it, and who knows, they may find a way to undo the leave vote. But I guess you say in the article it still is really up in the air of whether this is actually going to be good for the economy of the UK or not, depending on how they play it.
It depends on what they do. The automatic consequences are pretty sparse. It depends on what they do after the separation or during the course of the separation. Look, there are some very prosperous economies in Europe that are not members of the EU. Switzerland and Norway, for example, they're not poor backwater places by any stretch. They have, in fact, have trade agreements with the EU, but they're not members of the EU. Now, under those arrangements, they do have to comply with certain conditions, and they may or may not be good conditions. But the point is, it doesn't mean non-membership in the EU doesn't mean isolationism or attempt at self-sufficiency or autarky. England can, Britain, and who knows, Scotland may leave because Scotland wants to stay in the EU, so maybe they're going to end up leaving Great Britain. But Britain can still. There's no reason why Britain can't trade with the rest of the world. Now, let's look at it in terms of America. One of the things we have to get through our heads here, and I'm hoping in this presidential campaign, this point is going to get illuminated. Certainly, Trump and Clinton aren't going to illuminate it. But why is trade a matter for the state to write agreements about? Why aren't just free trade supposed to mean free trade? It means you and I get to make our own trade deals, not only you and me with each other, but you and me with respect to people who live across America's boundaries, on the other side of America's boundaries. Trade should not be, trade shouldn't be followed by the word policy. There should just be trade, people being free to trade, not trade deals. And so why can't I buy from British companies? Why do I need an agreement between the United States government and the British government before I can trade, buy things from Brits or sell things to Brits? I mean, that's what we need to start thinking about. Maybe Brexit will give us an opportunity to think that way. There are at least relative free traders who were very prominent in the Brexit movement, in the Leave movement, namely Daniel Hannan, who you may remember from a few years ago, gave a very pro-free market speech. He's a member of the European Parliament. Gave a very pro-market speech on the floor of the European Parliament. And Boris Johnson, both of these guys are possible prime ministers. Boris Johnson, who has taken pro-trade, pro-free trade positions. Now, I'm not saying they're against agreements, but at least if they're in favor of agreements, I think they may be in favor of something that looks much more like free trade than what many people talk about, including Clinton and Trump.
Mm-hmm. All right, now, well, according to the papers anyway, this is all about immigration. Too many Poles, too many Muslims from, Turkey and south of there. And so the xenophobes and the right-wing reactionaries, they did a horrible thing by sabotaging the future and, like that. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here. Are you a libertarian and or peacenik? Live in North America? If you want, you could hire me to come and give a speech to your group. I'm good on the terror war and intervention, civil liberty stuff, blaming Woodrow Wilson for everything bad in the world, Iran, central banking, political realignment, and, well, everything. I can teach markets to liberals and peace to the right. Just watch me. Check out scotthorton.org/speeches for some examples and email me, scott@scotthorton.org for more information. See you there.
Well, it's not all about that. That was part of it. A poll from I think it's called the Lord Ashcroft, I guess that's a foundation or a polling organization in England, in Britain, showed that while it was named the top issue by people who voted Leave, it only won by a plurality, about 1/3. That means 2/3 of people who voted for Leave named some other issue as the top issue. One issue that shows up a lot among people who voted for Leave is they just thought British affairs should be decided by Britons and not by a huge bureaucracy in Brussels, which contains people from all the other countries of Europe. Now, that from a libertarian standpoint, that's kind of both good and bad. I mean, I do favor, like I say, I favor decentralization, and if there's going to be government, have it close where people can keep an eye on it. But that, of course, doesn't mean that government can't be abusive. Of course it can. And so, if you take the logic of these Leave people consistently, if you apply it consistently, they wanted to devolve power, right, from Brussels to London, because they want Brits making decisions. But however, when a Brit makes a decision, that doesn't mean any individual Brit has any say in the matter, because he only casts one vote to put one person in the parliament. So the logic of devolution should be down to the individual level, right? I want to make my own decisions for me, respecting the rights of other people, of course, and I want you to make your decisions for you. And so the logic of devolution with a D is basically individual freedom all the way down, where we only engage in voluntary exchange and other kind of voluntary peaceful relationships, and no pseudo representatives, which is really in the end what they are, make decisions for us. So if you carry the logic through, then you get the kind of thing I think you and I would like, not simply a big parliament. A parliament in London is smaller and closer than a parliament in Brussels, but it's still far if you live in, say, Yorkshire or somewhere else outside of London. It's still too far. I want to be my own parliament. Mm-hmm. Each his own parliament. That maybe that's the new bumper sticker. Yeah,
I'm with you. I'll send that one off this afternoon. Hey, okay, but so here's the argument that no, man, you got to have a U.S. federal government or a European federal government in even a global world trade organization to serve as a global federal government on trade issues anyway, in order that centralized power may use force to liberalize, because otherwise everybody's going to try to cheat. And so, someone asked me, I'm doing a Ask Me Anything on Reddit, and somebody asked me, I'm sure you've heard this case for war before, that, never mind individual rights and everything, but over the broader sweep of history, isn't it a good thing that D.C. rules all of the middle part of North America, and that therefore we haven't had a war or any kind of major conflict in more than 150, 170 years, whatever it is, and everything's going really great right now, as far as the overall number of trucks and factories and roads and the ability of people to have capital and move it around where they need it, make good investments and profits and raise up a middle class and all these things. How could that have happened if we'd had 50 states? Wouldn't they have all been at war all this time, or at least some of the time, and ruined everything?
Well, you've maneuvered me into a position where I have to plug my book on the Constitution.
Okay.
So I'll thank you for that. It's good that you bring that up, because there is the parallel there. The debate over the Articles of Confederation versus the Constitution is kind of a similar debate, where you had people making that very argument. Madison and others argued for the Constitution, a consolidation of the states into a unitary state, although there was going to be some state powers left behind, not many maybe, but the argument was that would have the benign effect, the liberalizing effect. But the problem with that argument is that the states, the people in the various states under the Articles of Confederation, and that lasted 8 years, it wasn't an insignificant time, they weren't at war. They were trading. They didn't have internal passports. You could move from state to state. You could carry goods from state to state and sell your stuff. It was already a free trade zone. I think what you've articulated, and I realize you're playing sort of devil's advocate here, is that this is the belief that order can only be produced by a planner, meaning a political authority. And there's a very nice piece on Reason magazine, and I think it's part of a larger study that Cato has just published by a guy named, I think it's Martin Tupy, T-U-P-Y. I don't know how he pronounces his name, but arguing against the idea that it's the EU that has brought peace and trade and prosperity to Europe. He shows that that's a fallacy. Number one, he points out the ways it actually has helped create disorder. But order comes from other places, as Thomas Paine and others understood. Order is not produced by government power. Order is produced by people's natural interest in trading and getting along. And it's a minority of people a very small minority of people that don't understand that. People in their private lives trade and cooperate and respect the rights of other people. States have ways of creating disorder and mayhem.
Mm-hmm. Well, but that being the case, since we all live in states and not anarcho-capitalist private property is Stan, then, won't on the international level, isn't it more likely now that the Europeans and the British will have barriers to trade rather than they'll, act as you would prescribe, which is compete with each other to be better places for capital to want to live?
Well, I don't think so, because Switzerland doesn't have barriers against the rest of Europe and vice versa, and neither does Norway or Iceland. Or there are countries that are trade with Europe, the European Union, countries within the European Union all the time, every day. They're not members. Even Nigel Farage, the head of the UK Independence Party, who he doesn't hold much power. He's a member of the European Parliament. I think their party has one seat in the British Parliament. He says he's not for isolationism and trade. He's not good on the immigration issue. He kind of demagogued that in the campaign, but he doesn't want to cut, he says he doesn't want to cut Britain off from the rest of the world in terms of trade. He just thinks decision making should be made in London, not in Brussels. So, I don't know that there's an actual Trump who's among prominent people in in Britain calling for out-and-out protectionism. I mean, I don't know that there's a Trump-like character in Britain. And I'm speaking now when I say Trump, I don't mean necessarily on immigration, because there are Trump types on immigration. But as far as trade goes, if you saw his trade speech the other day, it was horrendous. It was a fully comprehensive protectionist program that he laid out, which is totally insane. You can find some good stuff on Reason magazine today by Peter Suderman and others showing what a tissue of lies and fallacies it is. I don't know of a character like that in Britain, so I don't hear anyone calling for cutting Britain off from the rest of the world with the wall of protectionist wall. Yeah. So that doesn't follow from exiting the EU. Yeah. Look, the logic, just like I said, the logic of my position is individual. Every man his own parliament. Every person his own parliament. The logic of the state types is world government, and then you kind of already stated that, right? If it's good on a European-wide level, and if it's good in North America, why shouldn't we have a world state?
Well, that's what they think, right? That's the whole point of building the EU in the first place.
Used to be what was called the World Federalist Society or something like that. It probably still exists. It used to be more prominent in the 50s and 60s. They wanted a single world government. They were sad that the UN never, wasn't actually that.
Well, they want a world central bank and a world currency too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and even the New Dealers during the war were sort of planning on a international New Deal, which the IMF was, supposed to play a role in that. They didn't get all they wanted, but they got a lot of what they wanted.
Well, and look, the thing is, their attempts at building a world government proved why it can't work, because all they're going to really do is, act like a bunch of economic hitmen. That's the name of the game at the IMF, not truly building a greater world for all the citizens of mankind forever or whatever, as if they would even know how to do such a thing. Their game is, we exploit you and steal your resources at gunpoint. It's all just a scam. That's the way it has to be. That's what all government is. So the bigger the government is, the less able it is to accomplish its goals or to make its PR rhyme with its policy in any kind of way. So people quit using the IMF. People quit borrowing money from the IMF. They got burned too many times. How is it supposed to last as,
that's right.
the great clearinghouse of global capital?
People will find workarounds where that's necessary. A world government would just turn, rule over to a global elite. Obviously, the U.S. would be pretty prominent in that global elite. But the alternative is not what we call populism, which is sort of unlimited democracy. We original libertarians stand outside of that phony dichotomy, right? Neither elitism nor populism. What we want is individualism, but even that's not the best term, because that sounds like atomistic individuals, right? Cut off from each other. We want what I call molecular individualism, where people are related to other people in all kinds of ways: trade, culture, all kinds of ways people exchange, from friendship, all the kinds of voluntary, peaceful relationships you can think of. And where we each make our own decisions, but in coordination with other people, because it's to our interest. So we're neither populists nor elitists. If you look at the debate today, especially the way it's portrayed in the media, you'd think that's the choice, right? Elitism versus populism. I say no to both of those, because
nationalism versus globalism.
Yeah. Globalism, unfortunately, the word has sort of been hijacked. That word could have been a benign word, meaning just a global market. Not that there's an elite running things, but that the political boundaries, even if they existed in some cultural sense, didn't exist in an economic sense. Because if I want to trade with someone on the other side of a boundary, I don't have a political authority in the way saying, have you complied with all the conditions? If not, you can't trade with that person. Right. Now, economically, we should be able to ignore those boundaries.
Now, what you can do is sell cluster bombs to Saudi Arabia, though, if you want. If you got some.
We don't need to, because we can rely on the government to do that for us, right?
Yeah. All right, listen, man, I'm sorry I got to go because I got another interview lined up here. But thanks very much for talking with me about this and for writing this great article. I hope everybody will look at it. Brexit. Which kind of dependence now? Sheldon Richman, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Scott. Bye-bye.
All right, and you guys check out sheldonrichman.com. That's his great blog, free association, and his column at antiwar.com. Scott Horton Show, scotthorton.org. Sign up for the podcast feed. Support at scotthorton.org/donate. Follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Thanks. Hey, I'll check out the audiobook of Lou Rockwell's Fascism versus Capitalism, narrated by me, Scott Horton, at audible.com. It's a great collection of his essays and speeches on the important tradition of liberty. From medieval history to the Ron Paul Revolution, Rockwell blasts our status enemies, profiles our greatest libertarian heroes, and prescribes the path forward in the battle against Leviathan. Fascism versus Capitalism by Lou Rockwell for audiobook. Find it at Audible, Amazon, iTunes, or just click in the right margin of my website at scotthorton.org. Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com. You hate government, one of them libertarian types, or maybe you just can't stand the president, gun grabbers, or warmongers. Me too. That's why I invented LibertyStickers.com. Well, Rick owns it now, and I didn't make up all of them, but still, if you're driving around and want to tell everyone else how wrong their politics are, there's only one place to go. LibertyStickers.com has got your bumper covered. Left, right, libertarian, empire, police, state, founders quote, central banking. Yes, bumper stickers about central banking. Lots of them. And, well, everything that matters. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck.